Hello, I'm Mishka, and this channel is the Helsinki Renaissance, where we will talk about arts and culture in perhaps a somewhat foolish manner, because I didn't open this book from the right page in advance, so I just perhaps I overestimated how easy it would be to find the right page. But anyway, uh, I could show you the book. This became more difficult than I estimated, or in fact, I didn't estimate anything. I just leaped before looking, as I have started doing recently. But anyway, I have this book by a Finnish film historian called Peter van Baag, although perhaps the indefinite article doesn't do the gentleman justice, in that you could almost say that this is a book by the Finnish film historian Peter van Baag. And basically, it's almost pointless for anyone other than Peter van Baag to be a film historian in Finland afterwards. It's just like Wayne Gretzky has the type of records in hockey that it's not possible for anyone to try and put totals like that, point totals like that in any season anymore. So too with Peter van Baag. He contributed a lot, shall we say. And this, I believe, is one of his last books. The introduction says that it was written in 2009. I have to say, I have faint memories about remembering when it was released. But that's about it. But anyway, so much for introduction, and well, I guess I'll have to transition to introducing this book. So, this book by Peter van Baag, Lajien synty. It's a Finnish pun on Darwin's Origin of the Species, but that pun doesn't work in English. So, in the Finnish language, we do have the French word genre. It is a loan word in Finnish, but we perhaps use it slightly less than the English use the word genre. So the word laji is used as a synonym for genre, but it's a different word, because I think in the French language genre means type. So if you say of a person in a romantic context that they are they're in your genre, it means that they're your type. So in the French language, the word genre has a broader meaning than as an English loan word. So unfortunately, that is all contributing to Darwinian puns being rather challenging in all languages. But be that as it may, this is Peter van Baag's book about essays about genre cinema. So there is some sort of a loose overall focus on sort of aesthetic theories about genre, but mostly it's just a way for him to write about movies that he hasn't written about elsewhere. He even says in the introduction that he refuses to write here about movies that he has extensively covered elsewhere. Well, I guess this is a good way for him to focus on something new. And anyway, I don't so much want to talk about either genre cinema or this book by Peter van Bach. This video that I planned on doing, this is about film critics. And anyway, the reason why I bring up this particular book is because there's a certain Billy Wilder quotation here that I want to get, but it just seems right now to be buried somewhere. Somewhere in the middle of it, and I'm trying to find it. You know, I just, I guess I've been accustomed to thinking that with cat's luck, I should just leap and land at the perfect point at the right time. But anyway, I just, I'm landing everywhere except at perfection right now. But, well, it is what it is. Is that movie from the 1940s? Yes. Right on time. So. Yes. What I wanted to talk about in this video was film critics. And the reason why I focused on, or well, perhaps focus might classify as a misnomer as far as my introduction goes. But if we use the word very liberally, the reason why I focused on Peter van Bach is because he is, I guess you could call him a kind of a film critic. Like, he has written film criticism in his youth, but then he transitioned away. I mean, he worked as a screenwriter, he worked as a director, although mostly non-fiction, documentaries that is. But anyway, he worked as a filmmaker, but basically he's best known as a film historian. But he also worked as a film critic, and this video is about film critics and about film critics that I intensely dislike. Peter van Bach, he's worth pointing out because both as a critic and a historian, he's someone that I do greatly like. And the reason why I can greatly like him is, even though our tastes aren't exactly the same, I think I don't exactly know how I can talk about just how our tastes differ, but perhaps yeah, I mean, I can't quickly come up with any kind of a simple explanation as to how our tastes differ, but it seems to me that Peter van Bach is perhaps he's more generally accepting of cinema than I am, in that I think that what I go for in cinema is something more specific, and it seems that Peter van Bach, that he has some sort of a greater general love for all kinds of cinema, and with me, I just demand a certain kind of precision from the director and a certain kind of live wire filmmaking. That I just there's a certain kind of technically well-made movie that just leaves me fairly cold. But I feel like Peter van Bach can appreciate that type of filmmaking a lot. But anyway. It's perhaps good to talk about Peter van Bach a bit, because if we talk of him as a film critic, the reason why I would like him, even though our tastes differ, is because I think that he's fundamentally fair. So, you know, if he writes a book about genre cinema, usually genre films are exactly the kind of stuff that critics tend to ignore. So this quote by Billy Wilder from a Robert Wise movie, which I believe it's called The Setup in English, but I didn't check what Viimeinen isku by Robert Wise, what the original title of it is. But anyway, here's an image from The Setup, and I'll read the Finnish translation of what Billy Wilder said, or what Robert Wise said of Billy Wilder. So, the Finnish version is: törmäsin Billy Wilderin ja Jean Negulescon ja he sanoivat, jos viimeinen isku olisi tehty Ranskassa tai Italiassa, kaikki maailman kriitikot ylistäisivät sitä kuorossa. Ja elokuva onkin yksi omia suosikkeja ja sitä pidetään yhä ehkä parhaana koskaan tehtynä nyrkkeilyelokuvana. So, I'll translate it quickly. Robert Wise talks about him bumping into Billy Wilder and Jean Negulesco, and they said that if The Setup was a French or an Italian movie, all the critics would line up to praise it. And then Robert Wise says that that movie is one of his personal favorites and is regarded as one of the greatest boxing movies of all time. So anyway, I think that that particular quote, which I had slight trouble locating, is actually at the heartlands of discussions about genre cinema and discussions about critics. And the reason why I said that I like Peter von Bach is because I think that he's fundamentally fair. He doesn't have double standards for different... that it's not as if he has one set of standards for Jean-Luc Godard movies and another set of standards for like Die Hard movies or something. That Peter von Bach seems to be that rarest of all critics where he's fundamentally passionate about cinema and he's interested in being interested in just about any kind of movies. So it's not to say that he likes everything, but that he hasn't given up on a movie before it started. And you know, if you look at this Billy Wilder quote about The Setup, the idea that Billy Wilder said is that if The Setup was a French movie, the critics would praise it more. So that seems to be that Billy Wilder is accusing critics of having double standards. That what Billy Wilder is basically saying that critics, well, there's no other way to interpret it. They are less demanding when it comes to French or Italian movies. So perhaps you could say that there is like some sort of a glass ceiling being put on American genre cinema. So that it's seen, and I have to transition to the real point of the video pretty quickly to explain this, in that it seems to be that there is such a thing as hierarchy of genres. And I think pretty well all critics would deny that they are operating with any kind of hierarchy of genres. And I'm sure pretty well all filmmakers who have read film criticism, I'm pretty sure that all filmmakers would co-sign the idea that critics are operating with hierarchies of genres. So that the people being accused of these kinds of double standards would deny it, and everyone else would accept it as a valid charge. So anyway, what this hierarchy of genres more specifically is that in the post-Renaissance Europe, the academies on the continent, they had this kind of class of people where I guess you'd call the academicians something like a cross between a teacher and a critic, so that they performed both tasks, in that they were the taste makers who were passing judgment on works, and they were also training the next generation of artists. Anyway, in the Renaissance period, you still had the kind of situation that young would-be painters were just apprenticed to the workshops of the older painters, so that older painters could micromanage tasks that they didn't feel like doing to their teenage apprentices. So the way that was Michelangelo apprenticed to the works of Domenico Ghirlandaio, for instance. So that seemed to be the way to go for a while. But then, well, it's just, I guess when painting was restored as a formidable industry, there became these people who could be adjacent to the successful painters, so that you couldn't really have professional critics or professional teachers before there was some sort of a high-level demand for painters, and that the superstar painters of the High Renaissance brought forth various other professionals adjacent to the painting situation. So various academies started being born in continental Europe, and then academicians they wanted to hold on to the power with the taste making very firmly, and I suppose the height of the power of the academicians would have been the 18th century, so that the neoclassical period would have been when the most extreme level of deference was being paid to the academicians. So anyway, what this situation with the academicians did is that they were very upfront that they were that painters had preferred career choices, so that the academicians developed this kind of theory of the hierarchy of genres, so that basically it was seen that still lifes weren't a particularly academically respected style of painting. Portraits weren't that respected. Landscapes weren't that respected. But then allegories and epic historical paintings of, say, biblical subject matters, or about something from antiquity, for instance, that was what the academicians most respected. So basically, there was a situation that, to put it rather bluntly, painting that seemed somehow a product of the academies, so painting that couldn't really be done without the academies was most respected, and then the paintings that could be done without any involvement of the academies, that was the least respected. So anyway, this hierarchy of genres was a real institution, rigorously maintained in the 18th century. So you could say that there were essentially two strands in painting. There was the strand of paintings that the marketplace had an organically growing demand for. So that when somebody commissioned a painting, they were likely to commission a portrait, either of themselves or of somebody they knew. So that there was a certain organic demand for portraits. There was a certain organic, well, I don't know if there was a demand for landscapes and still lifes, for instance, but because those subjects were there, painters, partly in an attempt at honing their craft, perhaps partly just to find something to do and to have something to sell, painters were doing landscapes and still life portraits just to have paintings. So that there was a certain normal reason why still lifes and landscapes were being painted, and since they were being painted, they were being sold. So for the three types of paintings that were, as it were, just normally out there, still lifes, landscapes, and portraits, the academicians had, well, they didn't have any respect for them, and at times they, well, perhaps contempt is too strong a word, but they were certainly acting in a condescending manner towards those kinds of, quote, inferior, unquote, genres. So anyway, what about allegories and history paintings? Well, you could say that there wasn't any kind of organic demand, so that people didn't have a private interest in, say, Moses parting the Red Sea is the way that they would have an interest in a picture of themselves or a picture of their son or daughter or something, picture of their father or whatever. That there was comparatively lesser interest in historical paintings and allegories. So you could make the argument that the marketplace didn't organically want any grand historical paintings. The marketplace didn't organically want a great volume of allegories. But because the painters couldn't really understand the point of allegories without the academicians, so that there was this kind of a strange racket that the academicians were controlling the market and they were creating an artificial demand for allegories and historical paintings, and the biblical historical paintings were it was the most prestigious genre. And if you could combine an allegory and a historical painting, that there would be like some clues in the paintings that there was some character pointing there and some character holding a certain specific kind of a leaf that symbolized something. That would be like the creme de la creme according to the academicians. And it's because the academicians were creating their own profession, that there was paintings that felt like they needed to be deciphered and explained to the public by the academicians. So the academicians praised paintings on a scale depending on how necessary academicians were to the painting's success. So portraits needed academicians the least, and so academicians didn't extend any kind of favors towards the genre of paintings, whereas allegories needed academicians perhaps the most, so they took it under their wings. So that there was very clearly this kind of a borderline Machiavellian, self-serving culture and conflict of interest with this kind of hierarchy of genres. That, it's just, it is there as the main line of art history from the, say, mid-16th century to something like mid 19th century. So people like the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood in Britain, and then folks like Edward Manet in France, they started leveling these kinds of body blows to the academicians. And if somebody like Edward Manet, for instance, he had this kind of very dear to the French succès de scandale. The scandal that Manet paintings would have faced, it would have been this kind of academician-fueled scandals. So that, it was seen that Edward Manet didn't accept the rules of the game set by the academicians. He didn't make any effort to acclimatize to the academicians, so the academicians took vengeance on Manet and said that he is some sort of a degenerate and he's the worst painter ever and whatever, and that they just fight this kind of hail of savage criticisms of Manet and of any artist who dared break ranks and not see the art form the way that the academicians saw the art form. So the hierarchy of genres was absolutely a thing throughout the history of modern European painting, or perhaps some would say pre-modern, because they would think that modern art only begins with Edward Manet. But compared to antiquity, even the Renaissance is modern. So it just depends on your terminology. But anyway, the hierarchy of genres absolutely was a thing that no one can deny with painting. Now, film critics, I would argue, and Billy Wilder seemed to argue, film critics have hierarchy of genres, but the difference is that everything about art history seemed to change in the 1860s. I did my video called The Case Against Postmodernism, where I talked about this side of history, about how the 1860s changed everything. But anyway, what happened is that the critics fought Edward Manet, and those critics lost. So what happened is that the modernists and the postmodernists, they couldn't be defeated by the classical critics. So what happened is that critics acclimatized to the new wave of Richard Wagner and Edward Manet and Charles Baudelaire. So critics acclimatized to the modernists because they couldn't beat them, they joined them. And so what happened is that critics operate under the same structures as before, but they recognize that because the classical critics lost in the 1860s in this battle for art history, the classicists lost against the modernists. And basically what happened is that critics don't want to have any similarities to the pre-1860s academicians since they lost. They just are sort of completely written out of art history. But critics act the same. They just deny any similarities to the predecessors of the past, and sometimes, as in painting, it seems that critics still have the same structure of hierarchy of genres. The difference is that academicians of the 18th century certainly would have held something like abstract art probably beneath their contempt. So that if they would have seen some, Kazimir Malevich paintings, I don't think they would have regarded it like they probably would have thought of it as some sort of a demented version of a still life or something. So if still life was the worst genre, abstract art probably would have been like a subgenre of the worst genre or something. But like it seems to me that what the 18th century hierarchy of genres, if you adapt modern modern forms of painting to it, you just have to flip upside down the 18th century academician genres and you get the modern hierarchy of genres. So if grand historical paintings were the most prestigious back then, they are the least prestigious now. And critics would, fall in line to call all of it kitsch, and so on. So the hierarchy of genres is still alive and kicking in painting. It's just in the reverse order than what it used to be. And it is very clear that when in 1860s there was this battle between modernists and classicists that, critics just switch sides in that, and then again they are operating in the kind of situation that critics are praising the kind of painting that needs critics, so that critics are like translators of the painting. They are translating what the painting is saying to the audience, and the paintings that do their own talking, that don't need any translations, well, the critics abandon those because they aren't creating their own profession praising that stuff. So anyway, the hierarchy of genres is still alive and well in painting, and it's despite critics denying it. I mean, critics would probably deny it in painting as well, although if they would deny it, I think it speaks volumes about their intellectual honesty. But anyway, they probably would deny it in painting, and they certainly deny it in cinema. But Billy Wilder accused them of operating with hierarchy of genres, and I'm saying that they are certainly operating with hierarchies of genres. Basically, the reason why at the beginning of this video I praised Peter von Bach is because I think that he is one of the rare critics who he has no hierarchies of genres. I think Roger Ebert also, he had no hierarchies of genres. I think that perhaps somebody like Andrew Sarris, for instance, he could be the kind of critic who, like perhaps the Andrew Sarris type critic, you would say that he is hard but fair. In that Andrew Sarris, he is willing to accept merit in strange places, let's say. So that if he would be a hard but fair type critic, he would not give up on a movie before it's happened, but he might give up on it pretty quickly if he would be, hard to please type critic. But anyway, whether somebody is, fairly easy to please, like Roger Ebert might be argued to be, or fairly hard to please, like Andrew Sarris might be argued to be. What both have in common is that I think that they don't have double standards. But Billy Wilder absolutely argued that the overwhelming majority of critics have double standards, and I'm making that argument. I'm saying that something like 80 or 90% of all critics have double standards, and that hierarchy of genres is that double standard. So the idea that what the classical academicians had is that a historical painting is superior to a still life just because it's a historical painting. That there was a situation that historical paintings, as it were, started from the third base. So, they had an overwhelming advantage simply because of the genre. So critics had, double standards in that the genres that they had taken under their wings, they were the genres that to them had winners, and then other genres just, they had to, try to survive on their own out in the cold without any kind of support from the academicians. Like, they absolutely had double standards, and critics right now are having it. And if Billy Wilder says that the setup by Robert Wise, rather ironically titled, considering the point of this video. But if Billy Wilder is saying that critics have double standards and they have one set of ratings for an American genre films and another set of ratings for a French film, like arguably, I've made this point earlier, is that it seems to me that for a certain kind of audience, artistry and exotism seem to be sort of intertwined. So, you know, if something is too close to home, it won't be exotic, and then it will have the kind of familiarity breeds contempt type situation. So that because familiar things lack the exoticism, they will be dismissed the way that foreign works won't be. So in an earlier video where I said that Finnish audiences would be more likely to dismiss a Finnish opera than they would be to dismiss an Italian opera, because for Finnish audiences, Italian operas are exotic, Finnish operas aren't. But for foreign audiences, Finnish operas can play like exotic works as well. And it occurred to me that, you know, there's this bewildering thing that even foreign critics can function as exotic in Finland, and that, you know, like, the most average critic from some other culture could become even like a minor star in Finland if they came to pass judgment on some Finnish artworks, because they would somehow create this kind of situation of artistry and exotism, and finding that they would be like an alchemist who, when a foreigner passes judgment on something Finnish in Finland, they would as if create this kind of slightly surreal, you know, exotic charging to the situation. And, you know, whatever a foreigner would say about Risto Jarva movies or Mikko Niskanen movies or Klaus Harro movies, like Finnish audiences would as if wake up from the drowsiness when there is a situation that you meet the requirements of artistry and exotism when a foreigner passes judgment on a Finnish work in Finland. Like, you know, I mean, these are theories that I very firmly hold, and I think that it would be very easy to find artists to co-sign these statements and very difficult to find critics to co-sign them, because it's essentially pointing out corruption, you know, just absolute omnipresent mental corruption in academicians and critics. You know, it is how I see the situation. And the reason why I've been so critical of critics is because, you know, if you think of a football situation of American football, for instance, NFL teams employ scouts to look at college football players, and they are trying to find out who the most talented college football players are so that they could improve their NFL team with those college football players. But what if there was a situation that football scouts acted the way critics act? So what if they had a hierarchy of football schools? So that if Ohio State University would be marked as one of the superior schools, and something like Colorado University would be marked as a second tier football school. So if there was a situation that scouts said that if prospects are rated between 1 star and 5 stars, if all Ohio State football players would be rated, the best players would be rated 5 stars and the other players would be rated 4 stars, And then if Colorado University, if there would be a situation that the best would be rated 3 stars and the rest would be rated 2 stars. That if scouts just looked at the prestige of the overall schools and didn't make any kind of evaluations on the individual talent, because like a free safety from Colorado can very easily be just as good as a free safety in Ohio, or the kicker can be just as good as in Ohio. But if there is the kind of situation that there's a hierarchy of schools and the more prestigious school automatically gets higher star ratings on its players, well, it would make the review process kind of pointless, because you could just look at what school somebody went to and then overestimate their impact on an NFL team. So that basically the NFL teams, it would be pointless to pay the scouts, because folks in Europe who don't know anything about American football, they can find out what the 10 most prestigious programs are, and they could be hey, why not draft from that famous school there? And why not ignore those not famous school there? That's not professional scouting. That would be just complete lunacy. But that kind of lunacy is what the hierarchy of genres is doing. In that the only point that critics arguably have is that if how the market organically operates is that the studios produce a set amount of movies, but they aren't getting equally behind everything. So that the studios think that they have blue chip properties and then they also run properties. And the studios try to have hits with the blue chip properties, and then the also run properties are like long shot bets. In that studios will be more than happy if they get a sleeper hit with an obscure romantic comedy or something. They will be more than happy to get that, but they aren't banking on it. So that the studios are just throwing certain projects out there and see whether they can overperform. They release 50 also run movies to have 1 or 2 of them overperform, and then the reason why they can keep doing that is because the biggest hits are designed to be so big that they pay for the also run movies as well as for the tentpole movies. So that's how Hollywood operates. So how the marketplace operates is that Hollywood gets behind the blockbuster releases in a big way, and then they just sort of abandon the smaller movies. And so what the process of abandoning them is that they don't have a big marketing push. So the lack of marketing budget means that audiences aren't getting informed in a big way if some Bruce Willis and Mos Def movie like 16 Blocks from 2006. Studios didn't get behind that in a big way, and so the audiences aren't kept very informed about it. So the chances are that when that film premieres, nobody goes to see it. So the only function that critics have is that critics can rescue certain films from obscurity, is that if the marketing people aren't getting behind the movie, then basically the second chance at life is if the critics get behind the movie. But the critics are very unlikely to get behind something like 16 Blocks because it's from the wrong genre. So, some critics, like, if I said that there's 3 critics that I like, I named 3 critics that I do like, and if Peter von Bach, Roger Ebert, and Andrew Saris, none of whom are with us still, unfortunately, but if three of them would see a movie like 16 Blocks, it's unlikely that any of them would give it a particularly glowing review. But I think that the important thing is that if they would just give it a chance, that's all, just give it a chance. And if it doesn't click, then it doesn't click. But then the problem with critics is that if they are, in a way, the last line before obscurity, that critics are there observing the scene, and then their one task essentially is to rescue the smaller budget without smaller properties without advertisement budgets. And basically, if there are interesting movies being released that don't have the advertisement budgets, if the critics don't rescue them from obscurity, then audiences are not being served properly by the various industries that are out there. Our culture isn't doing what it should be doing, and then the film culture just starts breaking apart. And the setup by Robert Wise, Robert Wise is a perfect example of the kind of filmmaking that represents what critics should be doing and what critics aren't doing. So when I was watching I believe it was a Robert Wise movie called Somebody Up There Likes Me. And when I was watching it, I was shocked to what extent Martin Scorsese had essentially liberally borrowed the aesthetic from that movie to Raging Bull. So, you could say that Raging Bull is the superior version of Somebody Up There Likes Me. That Robert De Niro's performance is slightly better than Paul Newman's performance. That Scorsese's direction is slightly superior to Robert Wise's direction. Like, you could make that kind of a case. But, what you could also say is that Martin Scorsese probably wouldn't have had a career without Robert Wise. And Raging Bull certainly wouldn't exist without Somebody Up There Likes Me. And this kind of idea that, a movie that's good enough to give Martin Scorsese his career might be just the kind of movie that just slips through the cracks. Scorsese is the kind of person who recognizes quality. He is the kind of person who I think doesn't have double standards and, who is doing the right things in the culture, for instance. Somebody like Martin Scorsese could say that Robert Wise is an underrated director. So what it means is that critics are somehow too mentally corrupt to understand why Robert Wise is good. So, Martin Scorsese could halfway sort of begin something that would almost say what I just said, and Billy Wilder, who would be slightly tougher a customer, would just come out and say that critics lack the mental awareness of recognizing the quality in Robert Wise. So, I don't want to be harsh on critics, but I certainly need to explain myself as to why I am so massively critical of the film critics of the world. And, that hierarchy of genres where, this is what I think of critics. I think artists are like native Athenians or something, or native Romans or whatever. And then, certain professors or certain artists, they are like natives, and then lots of critics and certain kinds of audience members, they are like tourists in Athens or Rome. And then, some audience members seem to look towards critics. They think that critics are intellectuals. They think that critics are aesthetes or whatever. But unfortunately, I think critics are just hack frauds. They pose as native Athenians or native Romans, but they aren't that. They are just tourists. They are like professionally sort of touring, like, I mean, I guess they would be like tour guides or something. But, just the point is that audiences seem to think of critics as being something adjacent to intellectuals, but I don't see it that way. I mean, to me, how critics connect with cinema is some lowest common denominator type connections. And the kind of idea that critics would dismiss something like Robert Weiss's The Setup because they dismiss the genre. So Billy Wilder would say that critics are too stupid to understand that Robert Weiss movie. And how critics would respond is that because it's from the wrong genre, there's nothing there to be understood. And Billy Wilder would say that that's your fucking problem, that's your fucking stupidity. That hierarchy of genres is the mental corruption that is ruining your profession. I mean, that is the heart of the problem. And, if critics, for instance, if I'm accusing them of like essentially being tourists in these places where some others are natives, like if critics think that they paint with a broad brush and say that France and Italy have like art house scenes, that if there's a French genre film like Touché pas or Crispy by Jacques Becker, or Jean-Pierre Melville's Les Dulot. If those are French genre films, they are treated as being like art house films in America because they meet the qualification of exotism of a foreign work meeting. It's as if exotism galvanizes the artistry to the tourists. So that you could have any kind of cheap plastic tourist crap in Athens, but it would seem artistic to the tourist because of that exotism galvanizing the property to those who don't have a very savvy relation to it. So if these critics, for instance, if Billy Wilder is saying that a French boxing movie doesn't have the kind of glass ceiling with critics as an American boxing movie does, he is pointing out the double standard and he is pointing out where the critics fail. So basically, if we go with this football analogy, Billy Wilder seems to say that American boxing movies would be like football players from Colorado University, and French boxing movies would be like football players from Ohio State, and they are saying that critics are just rubber stamping better draft grades for Ohio State players than Colorado State from Colorado University players, just because critics think that they won't be exposed if they get behind some property that there's a history of others getting behind, and then conversely, if there isn't a history of anyone getting behind, say, American boxing movies or Colorado football players, they think that they will not be exposed by just hacking out, evaluations. With just rubber stamping 3 stars on some player that nobody has ever heard of. But like very clearly this, like the only reason why some American leagues are so much better than leagues around the world in some other countries is because there's the right kind of culture around them. There is a player development from an early age, and then the scouting tries to find the optimal players. Like, it all breaks down if there's some rubber stamp evaluations. But I mean, that's why American film culture right now is in such bad state. It's because of that rubber stamp evaluation. NFL is doing just fine. Like, folks talk about dropping attendance rates and whatever, but like in the grand scheme of things, NFL is doing just fine. But American cinema is in real fucking trouble, and the inflated ticket prices won't be any kind of silver lining for long, because the return of investment figures look less pretty, by the minute, critics are a symptom of the larger problem, and it's just the film culture that is out there. It is in really bad state, and this kind of hierarchy of genres, where the movies that need critics are the movies that then get critics, and the movies that don't need them, they are the ones that are abandoned by critics, and that is just sort of creating this kind of strange, distorted view of what to some is quality in cinema. And I saw this. This to me is just most emblematic of this kind of situation. Is that there was this kind of completely stupid Ed Wood level B-Western called Silver Load, where the one saving grace to that movie is that it was an allegory. So, it was like some sort of a poor man's version of Fred Zinnemann's High Noon. So this kind of idea that communist witch hunts played out in a Western setting. But anyway, the filmmaking was piss poor on that one. The allegory level is just completely boneheaded. Like, it's like some sort of a, junior high school level property. And, this critic on this page gave it 4 stars out of 5, just because it was in the right genre. That is the process where our film culture is breaking down. That, if something like The Setup by Robert Wise, if it would be in the wrong genre and it would get like 3 stars, and some completely Ed Wood level allegory gets 4 stars just because it's an allegory, and just because it needs critics to translate what it's doing to the audience. Like, this is that place where our film culture can't go on, where we can't produce great professionals when we don't have right people making the right moves. Like, if critics, ask Eddie Murphy. When Eddie Murphy is in a comedy, people give it 3 stars. When he's in a drama like Dreamgirls, people give it 4 stars. Because even though Dreamgirls is mostly, Dreamgirls is nothing special, and something like Coming to America is a modern classic, but critics won't acknowledge that Coming to America is a better film than Dreamgirls, because they have the hierarchy of genres, and they just stick with it. And I'm just trying to get some people to notice the problem and to snap out of it, if at all possible, because this is getting embarrassing. And this kind of thing that Billy Wilder is saying, that I've been saying about Finnish movies, that some Finnish critics absolutely would give Finnish movies better grades if they were French. Like, I can't say it any better than Billy Wilder. If some old Finnish movie was French, the Finnish critics would give it better grades. but thankfully Finnish work can be exotic to foreigners, so that there's somebody somewhere who can make the right call, but not necessarily for the right reasons, and that's sort of the problem, and that's what I said in this video. But I'm running out of time, so thanks for watching and bye bye.